Stop what you're doing right now. What I'm about to tell you will affect every single American family with a college-bound kid. The Supreme Court just handed down a decision that fundamentally changes free speech in America. And if you think this only matters on college campuses, you're dead wrong. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Share this video because the mainstream media isn't telling you the full story. They're burying the lead, and you deserve to know what's really happening to the First Amendment in this country. Here's what happened. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that public universities can no longer create safe spaces that restrict constitutionally protected speech. But here's the bombshell they don't want you to know. This decision doesn't just affect universities, it sets a precedent that could dismantle decades of progressive speech control across all public institutions. I've been covering legal cases for 20 years, and I'm telling you, this is seismic. The justices didn't just rule on a narrow campus speech issue. They sent a clear message. The Constitution still matters, even when feelings get hurt. Let me break down what really happened here, because the details matter. A conservative student group at UC Berkeley wanted to invite a speaker who criticized gender ideology. The university said no, claiming it would create an unsafe environment for transgender students. The case wound its way to the highest court in the land. And guess what? The justices said universities can't play thought police anymore. But here's where it gets interesting. Justice Barrett wrote the majority opinion, and she didn't pull any punches. She essentially said that discomfort is not harm, and that universities have been weaponizing safety to silence viewpoints they don't like. Barrett wrote, and I quote, "The mere fact that speech is offensive or disagreeable does not strip it of constitutional protection." Now, the left is having an absolute meltdown. They're calling this decision dangerous and extremist. CNN ran a segment yesterday claiming this ruling will unleash hate speech on college campuses. MSNBC had a panel discussing how this decision endangers vulnerable students. Really? Upholding the First Amendment is extremist now? This is exactly the kind of backwards thinking that got us into this mess in the first place. For years, I've watched universities transform from places of learning into ideological indoctrination centers. Students are taught what to think, not how to think. Dissent is crushed. Conservative voices are silenced, and administrators have been complicit in creating these echo chambers where only progressive orthodoxy is allowed to flourish. I remember when I was at law school, we debated everything: abortion, gun rights, affirmative action, foreign policy. Nobody needed safe spaces. Nobody claimed that hearing opposing views caused them psychological trauma. We understood that intellectual discomfort was part of learning. That's how you develop critical thinking skills. But this Supreme Court decision changes everything. Universities can no longer hide behind vague safety concerns to shut down speech they don't like. They can't create special rules that apply only to conservative viewpoints. The Constitution applies on campus just like everywhere else. And let me tell you something about the media coverage of this story. Have you noticed how they're framing this as an attack on student safety? The New York Times ran an editorial claiming this decision will re-traumatize survivors of discrimination. The Washington Post published an op-ed arguing that free speech is a tool of oppression when used by conservatives. They're not mentioning that this case was about fundamental constitutional rights. They're not telling you that universities have been systematically discriminating against conservative speakers for years. I've seen this playbook before. When the left can't win on the merits, they change the subject. They make it about safety or hate or extremism. Anything except the actual issue, free speech rights. It's the same strategy they use on every issue where they're losing ground. Here's what this decision really means for your family. If your kid goes to a public university, they can no longer be punished for expressing conservative views. They can't be kicked out of class for questioning progressive orthodoxy. They can't be denied equal access to campus facilities because their ideas make someone uncomfortable. They can't be subjected to mandatory diversity training for expressing traditional religious beliefs. This is huge. For the past decade, conservative students have been walking on eggshells, afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge their professors, afraid to express their genuine beliefs. I've interviewed dozens of students who told me they felt like they had to hide their political views to avoid harassment or grade retaliation. That ends now. But the implications go far beyond campus. This decision establishes that government institutions cannot create content-based restrictions on speech, simply because that speech might cause emotional discomfort. Think about what that means for public schools, government meetings, even social media platforms that have partnerships with government agencies. The progressive left has been playing a long game here. They've been systematically redefining speech as violence, disagreement as hate, and traditional values as bigotry. This Supreme Court decision is a direct repudiation of that strategy. The justices essentially said that hurt feelings don't trump constitutional rights. Justice Thomas wrote a concurring opinion that's absolutely worth reading. He essentially said that universities have become the enemy of intellectual freedom, noting that institutions of higher education have departed from their historical commitment to a diverse marketplace of ideas. Strong words, but he's not wrong. When Harvard students can't even invite a sitting Supreme Court justice to speak without massive protests, something is deeply broken. Justice Alito joined that concurrence, adding that universities have created a culture of censorship that would have been unthinkable to the founding generation. He pointed out that the very idea of restricting speech based on its potential to cause offense runs counter to everything America stands for. Now, let me address something important. This doesn't mean universities are powerless. They can still maintain order. They can still enforce reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. What they can't do is discriminate based on viewpoint. They can't apply different standards to conservative versus liberal speakers. They can't define conservative viewpoints as inherently harmful while giving progressive speakers unlimited freedom. And here's the part that's going to drive the left absolutely crazy. This decision has teeth. Universities that violate these principles can now face serious legal consequences. Students whose rights are violated can sue for damages. The era of consequence-free censorship is over. Universities will have to pay actual money when they violate students' constitutional rights. I've been tracking campus free speech issues for years, and the pattern has been crystal clear. Conservative speakers get disinvited, conservative student groups get defunded, conservative professors get harassed until they quit. Meanwhile, radical leftist speakers face no such restrictions. They can call for the elimination of Israel, they can promote violence against police, they can advocate for the overthrow of capitalism, and somehow that doesn't threaten anyone's safety. Remember when UC Berkeley canceled Ann Coulter? Or when Yale students screamed at a professor for defending free speech? Or when Evergreen State essentially held a white professor hostage for refusing to participate in a day of absence for white people? Remember when Middlebury students physically attacked Charles Murray? Or when protesters at UC Davis pepper sprayed students attending a conservative speakers event? These weren't isolated incidents. This was systematic institutional suppression of conservative thought, and university administrators either participated in the suppression or stood by and let it happen. Finally, the Supreme Court has said enough. But let's talk about what happens next, because the left isn't going to take this lying down. They're already working on workarounds. They're talking about redefining what constitutes disruption or safety concerns. They're discussing new policies that would technically comply with this decision while still making life hell for conservative students and speakers. I guarantee you they're meeting in conference rooms right now, figuring out how to get around this ruling. They'll probably start requiring expensive security fees for conservative speakers. They'll create bureaucratic obstacles that make it nearly impossible to invite controversial guests. They'll train students to use hecklers' vetoes more effectively. They're going to try to comply with the letter of this decision while violating its spirit. That's why your attention matters. That's why you need to stay engaged. Because the fight for free speech doesn't end with one Supreme Court decision. It requires constant vigilance from parents, students, taxpayers, and concerned citizens. I want you to think about your own experiences. Have you ever felt like you couldn't express your real views at work, at your kids' school, in social situations? That feeling of walking on eggshells, constantly self-censoring, wondering if your honest opinions will get you in trouble? That's not normal in a free society. That's the culture of intimidation that progressives have created over the past 20 years. This Supreme Court decision is the beginning of rolling that back. But it's only the beginning. We need to rebuild a culture that actually values free expression, not just pays lip service to it. We need to teach our children that bad ideas are defeated with better ideas, not with censorship. Here's what you can do right now. Support organizations that fight for campus free speech. FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, has been leading this fight for years. They need your backing. The Alliance Defending Freedom has also been doing incredible work on this front. These groups have lawyers ready to fight for students whose rights are violated. If you have kids in college or heading to college, teach them their rights. Make sure they know they don't have to sit silently while professors indoctrinate them. Make sure they know they can fight back when their rights are violated, but also teach them to be smart about it. Document everything, record interactions when possible, build evidence. And most importantly, don't let the media gaslight you about what this decision means. They're going to tell you it's about protecting hate speech or endangering vulnerable students. That's nonsense. This is about protecting the fundamental American principle that the best answer to speech you don't like is more speech, not censorship. I've practiced law for years before getting into media, and I'm telling you, this is one of the most important free speech decisions in decades. It's not just about college campuses, it's about whether we're going to remain a free society or continue sliding toward authoritarianism disguised as compassion. The progressive left has been testing the boundaries of what they can get away with. They've been pushing and pushing, seeing how far they can restrict speech before someone pushes back. Well, today the Supreme Court pushed back hard, and it's about time. This decision sends a clear message. The Constitution isn't optional, free speech isn't negotiable, and feelings don't trump rights. The Founding Fathers didn't include a feelings exception to the First Amendment, and neither will this Supreme Court. The message from the Supreme Court is clear. America is still the land of the free. Now let's make sure it stays that way. Look, I'll be honest with you. This fight is far from over. The progressive establishment has spent decades building their censorship machine, and one Supreme Court decision isn't going to make them give up overnight. They're going to regroup, they're going to find new tactics, and they're going to try to undermine this ruling every way they can. But here's what they didn't count on. They've awakened a sleeping giant. Parents across America are finally seeing what's been happening on these campuses. Students are finally standing up for their rights, and the American people are finally saying enough is enough. This Supreme Court decision isn't just a legal victory, it's a rallying cry. It's proof that when we fight back, when we stand together, when we refuse to be intimidated, we can still win. So share this video, subscribe to this channel, and let's build a movement that will protect free speech for generations to come, because that's what America is all about.